started. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Emily. I'm the Customer Community Manager here at Hibob, and I'm thrilled to see so many of our UK customers gathered here to create something new that we haven't done before. As you know, I put out a survey over the summer to all of our customers to start understanding what topics are of interest to you and to break this out by region to make it more accessible. So I'm really excited to have you all here discussing a topic that you have selected yourselves. And today that topic is DE&I. And unlike other webinars you may have attended with Hibob, I don't have any slides to share with you today. What I do have are two of your fellow customers, Hibob customers, who have stepped up to the plate, and they'll be sharing how they are personally navigating DE&I within their own organizations. A few housekeeping items before I hand the microphone over to our first speaker. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a general chat and a Q&A chat, and it's important to understand the difference there. So the general chat is there for you to make a statement, share your thoughts with other attendees, cheer on your speakers if you'd like to. It's where I might drop in to start a little conversation while we're here. It's a general area for conversation with your fellow attendees while the session is ongoing. The Q&A chat is a place where you can type out a question that you have for one of our speakers. I'll be moderating those and sharing those questions throughout the session. So if you have a question that you'd like answered, be sure to toggle over to the Q&A chat and leave it there so I can easily review all of the questions in one place. We have the space reserved until 11:30. So once presentations have wrapped, you will find yourself back in the office space. So do feel free to click on a table or click yourself over to the bar, and you will drop into a private Zoom room with some of your fellow attendees around that table. This is a space for you to chat and network with the time that you have left at the end of the session. And if you have any specific questions for Pat or Rochelle that were answered during the session, you can take a look at where they're sitting and pull up a virtual seat right next to them. With that, I will hand the microphone over to our first speaker, Pat Caldwell. Pat is the COO of Fundapps, a tech startup that is automating regulatory compliance. He will take the floor now to share with you the journey he's gone on over the past 3 years to craft a really accessible parental leave policy at Fundapps and the results that he's seeing as the program has unfolded. This is really, really fascinating. We're so lucky to have him with us today. So without further ado, let's welcome Pat to the stage. Welcome, Pat. I'll leave it to you.
Thank you very much, Emily. And thanks for having me. It's rare to be speaking about something that's both so important at Fundapps, but also so important to me personally. I do have a couple of slides which I'll share in a moment, but I guess to set the scene as we start, a little bit about me and Fundapps. So as Emily mentioned, I'm the COO of Fundapps, which is a bit of a pick and mix in terms of what I looked after, everything from HR through to finance, legal, IT, facilities, operations, lots of things in there. But DE&I is particularly close to my heart for quite a few reasons. I guess my journey to have this as part of my role and also the work that we've been doing has probably been slightly atypical when I do share it. Even though I've ended up in, I guess, the fintech industry across London and New York, my background is actually, maybe you've worked out from the accent, back in Australia. But I've spent still most of my career to date in the Australian coal mining industry. So I used to work out in the coal mines about 200 kilometers from the nearest town. Often our workforce was tens of thousands of second, third, fourth generational miners, which is obviously an interesting start to a career in HR. Why that's relevant is because, for those first 6 years of my career, I was actively covering both my sexuality and my disability from everyone that I worked with, out of fear that it wouldn't be accepted or I wouldn't be included. I wouldn't have access to the same opportunities that other people did. And so I covered and I hid that, and that was my lived experience for a good 6 years, until such point it led me to quit HR altogether, and pursue something different. It wasn't until I met the founder of the company that I work for now, which is Fundapps, that I started to have that reigniting of that kind of passion and desire that was there. Hearing a founder talk about how he believes he can build a company where we can be incredibly successful as an organization and grow, but also do a lot of good by people and by the communities that we operate in is a pretty refreshing story. And that was what I joined about 4.5 years ago. Today, I'm going to be talking through, I guess, two elements in terms of how Fundapps approaches DE&I. The first one is what we call our playbook, which is overly formal for what it actually is, but it's a set of principles by which we've really tried to look through the lens of these principles for how we consider DE&I within the Fundapps workplace. Fundapps as a company is a bootstrapped tech scale up. We are almost 100 people. We have operations across the UK, the US, Singapore. We're now up to 5 countries within the EU, and that's the context in which we're really trying to focus a lot on these DE&I principles in our playbook. Um, it's also good to keep in mind that context, given that what we've designed and the way we look at DE&I is what we think is a great thing for Fundapps. And that doesn't always translate across organizational boundaries or sometimes geographical boundaries. So there's very much some lessons and results and principles that we've used throughout this, which may or may not translate into your organization, but certainly, hopefully, a few things here that resonate, given we tried to turn some traditional ways of working on its head. So I'm going to kick off with a little bit more about our DE&I playbook, which means hopefully in a second you'll be able to see the Fundapps slides. So I mentioned before that we have a set of principles around I guess, the formal lens for which we view the work that we do within the DE&I space. These are particularly important for us because it's one of the most topical items, probably validated by the fact that this is one of the first topics that's part of this kind of event. But it's so topical at the moment, I think, because we're increasingly becoming more convinced on the why. I think the business case for DE&I is now pretty well mapped, and I think where we've traditionally got stuck, myself included, is in the what and the how. And sometimes we lose our way, and sometimes we end up in some very interesting parts of DE&I. We don't have to look too far in LinkedIn to see them, but this is what we use as, I guess, an anchor. And this isn't a HR or people ops view. This is, we've had this as part of our leadership team. Everyone in our company has seen it. We genuinely have this up there with almost like our values within our company, maybe not to the same extent as our values. The first thing that we really try and focus on at Fundapps is the concept of inclusion. Now, there's a really fascinating thing happening within many industries at the moment, which is people's DE&I strategies and plans are, for want of a better way of describing it, a sprinkle of women and a dab of color across the company. Lots of cool photos that go on LinkedIn and our websites about it, and lots of stories about how we're pushing it out there, or we've got rainbow logos for Pride, or we've done cupcakes for International Women's Day, and all these things that I think don't really get to the heart of what inclusion actually is referring to. Our perspective on this as a company, what we've really tried to drive, is the idea that we need to create a workplace where genuinely people have psychological safety, feelings of belonging, the barriers that don't stand in the way of people really being able to do their best work, and contribute that to the company. We could go out very deliberately and hire what we see as, proxy, by way of proxy, very diverse candidates in terms of our current makeup, and call that a day. But that's basically a revolving door for good talent. Our view on inclusion is, if we genuinely get this right, if we do good by people, we do good in the communities that we operate in, then over time our workforce should actually start to reflect the demographic makeup of the communities that we operate in. So pretty much everything we focused on gets at the heart of, let's get inclusion right first, and diversity should come in time. As we go through some of the initiatives that we do as a company, there's obviously been lots of fun leadership team conversations that we have. Sometimes not heated conversations, but a good level of constructive debate around it. And I mentioned before that that path around creating a business case for DE&I is pretty well mapped. And there are lots of ways of doing it. One of the most powerful ways we've found is identifying something to do because it's simply the right thing to do. And that obviously sounds very, very fluffy. But if we come back to this concept of inclusion in particular, there are some things that we probably can't perfectly quantify. There are some things that we may not be able to fully articulate every single reason exactly why it's in the business interest to do this. And parental leave probably fits in this bucket. Um, but overarching, if we can sit around as a leadership team or sit around as a company and say, actually, what we're doing is the right thing to do by people in the communities, that's almost always the best reason to do something. It's the most powerful one. It's the one that sticks the longest. It's the one that doesn't need much reminding as a company for others as things evolve. So we're really trying not to shy away from the fact that sometimes the right thing to do is the best reason to do it in the first place. A commitment we have to our team, this is quite a small one, but a commitment we have to our team is that we don't want to be the company that talks about everything that we're going to do, because words don't really mean much unless you back it up with action. So our commitment to everyone in our company, when we stand up at our all hands meetings, when we talk about our annual goals and what we're actually going to achieve, we always come back to what have we done. It's a credibility piece ultimately to get something through the line. And I guess a bit of a saying that we have is that if you truly care about something, you will put your time or your money behind it. Everything other than that is I guess performative in some respects. So our commitment to our team is that always judge us by what we've done, not what we say we're going to do. One that's particularly close to me, obviously, for reasons that I shared before, is the design lens and methodology we use to create some of these initiatives. And there's no better example of that than parental leave, which I'll share shortly. But lived experience, we found, is often the single most effective design lens that you can have, particularly around DE&I. I'm not a parent. I can probably write a parental leave policy. I've probably seen plenty of parental leave policies that are out there. But the one thing I'm missing is actually what it is like to be a parent in the workplace, to have a growing family, sometimes to have very diverse family structures or to be based anywhere in the world. Um, I can appreciate and learn what it must be like as a parent, but I can't actually understand it because I'm not one. And our design methodology for many of the initiatives that we do is the people who are involved in designing it are people who have lived experience. So our parental leave policy and our approach to it was designed by the parents of Fundapps. I wish I could sit here and take credit for it because I think it's been a really great outcome, but I'm not the one that put it together. It was put together by parents from asking some very simple questions around what was going to really do good in their lives. And we've taken that concept of your lived experience going through various uh, experiences throughout your life and different challenges that you face is an incredible lens for which to look at how you set up initiatives within the workplace. One we enjoy quite a bit is this concept of pitching at 80%. It's simply uh, I guess a reflection that inside all of us, I know I'm very guilty of this, is this almost perfectionism. You want to craft a really, really perfect initiative or policy or strategy for what you're doing. And the side effect of seeking that perfect policy is that you never really get to the heart of actually doing something quickly and making an impact quickly. So we have a view for, and this isn't just for DE&I, this is across the entire kind of ops work that we build out, is that when something's roughly 80% ready to go, we do it. With a view that as we implement something, and in this case, parental leave, this was our fourth parental leave policy. But as we go through and actually implement it, the other 20% will come from a result of iteration. So we took 4 goes of iterating our parental leave to get it to where it actually is today. We probably need a fifth, sixth, and seventh over the years as come, especially as we keep growing. Um, but done is better than perfect in almost every instance. And the impact you can have from putting something in a few months or even a year earlier than what you might have by perfecting it often outweighs that final 20%. And the final one is something that I think I learned the hard way. After working in a really large organization with an incredible policy suite that pretty much covered everything. Almost what you had to wear to work was covered in a policy somewhere. At the end of the day, we're ultimately humans. And as HR and operational professionals, we have to design policies that cater to the nature of being human. Our first parental leave policy, I think, was 4 different policies. Once you covered things around adoption, shared parental leave, maternity, paternity leave, it covered well over 10 pages worth of stuff. And the first thing we had was a parent saying, if you're thinking about building a family, or perhaps you've just discovered that perhaps not deliberately your family is about to grow, the last thing you want is to be sitting down, trawling through pages and pages and pages of policy to work out what you can do, what you can't do. And that seems to go against this human experience of wanting some certainty and clarity in your life at this point. So we have a principle around design it in its most simplest form. Our 12 pages and 4 parental leave policies are now one parental leave policy, and it's 7 bullet points, I believe, and a little explanatory paragraph. And that's been in place now for over 2 years. So without further ado, I think the piece now, which is, well, what does all this mean in terms of parental leave? I'm excited, I guess, to share and also get some feedback, perspectives, challenges that you've seen as well, for how we've built parental leave within Fundapps. The first thing we built and made sure of is that it is gender blind. We use the example of how can we truly unlearn the stereotype of a woman being at home if we also don't unlearn the stereotype of a man being at work. What we realized when we spoke to all of our parents was that there was a very shared experience around what great parental leave looked like. And it all came back to spending meaningful, flexible time building their family and supporting their family. And it didn't matter if you were a mum or a dad, it didn't matter on your kind of family circumstance. It was a shared desire for meaningful parental leave. So we took the concept of maternity and paternity leave out, despite obviously most countries' legislation not doing that yet. We have one set of gender blind parental leave, 6 months at full pay. And so far, we've had both mums and dads use it very, very equally. It is global. I mentioned before, we're based all throughout the world. The simplest and bluntest way of putting this is that, I remember sitting down with a different company actually getting advice around parental leave, and they took me through how they had a UK policy and a US policy. And I was sitting there scratching my head thinking, okay, but why are parents different between the US and the UK? And the reasoning was, well, the US is a bit different. We can give less leave in the US, which is a pretty shit experience, obviously, coming back to being human in the workplace. So we made ours global. And what we shared with our team, which has obviously been pretty profound in especially countries like the US, is that those regional differences are simply an excuse to lower your standard, and we can't give into that. So what we put in is available to everyone across the globe. It naturally has a different impact depending on where people are based, but certainly you can imagine for those who do have US operations, going into the US in particular and telling mums and dads that they have 6 months of fully paid parental leave has been a pretty impactful thing for a lot of people. Just as we cover or made it gender blind, we've also made it blind to all family circumstances. Family structures are becoming increasingly diverse. Somehow, parental leave legislation in all of its different forms got a little bit left behind. If for anyone who does have particularly LGBTQ plus employees or parents in the workplace, it can often be a really fascinating experience talking to them around how they perceive this concept of maternity, paternity leave, or even the kind of the next step from that around primary and secondary caregiving. They often exclude people accidentally. So we simply said, whatever your family structure is, you're a parent. Perhaps a more solemn one, but we did have the question around what would we do in the event of stillbirth, and the most human answer for this is that it's exactly the same as parental leave. It's one of those things we built in with the hope that we absolutely never have to use it. No minimum tenure. This one absolutely rocked a few people's boats. But you can imagine if you've just come on as a team member, or potentially you're thinking about growing your family in the next couple of years, or maybe you're even expecting when you join a company. and you've just been told how amazing you're going to be in the company, you've just been given your offer letter and your contract, you're excited to start your onboarding journey, they're picturing big things for you. You get paid from day one, you get your pension hopefully from day one, you get access to your leave benefits from day one, except we don't trust you enough to give you parental leave from day one. And it all comes out of this basis that there's probably a small number of people somewhere who have joined a company, taken parental leave, and then pissed off at the end of it. We That is the 2%. I think that when Patty McCord talks about all of her Netflix work, she talks about don't let the 2% of people who are going to abuse something affect your ability to help 98% of people. So we scrapped our minimum tenure, and I'll obviously share with you the effects of that. And the final bit is the flexibility we gave within 2 years for people to use it. So at such point that you have a child's birth or adoption, we allow 2 years to be able to take that 6 months of leave. And I'll share with you in a sec what some of our people have been able to do with that, because there's been some really interesting indirect side effects that came from that. What all happened from this when we implemented it back in 2019? Again, judge us by our actions, not by our words. We had a few challenges along the way. Administering the 2-year flexibility kind of goes against the heart of really great workforce planning, especially when you discover that somebody's about to take parental leave. They're expecting a child in X month, and they really are not sure yet how they're going to structure their parental leave. So we've had to be really, really flexible in terms of how we potentially either backfill or reorganize work within the team to make sure that didn't present an accidental barrier to people potentially taking 2 months off when they give birth to a child or adopt a child, and potentially in a year's time taking the other 4 months off. We had the question straight away, what's going to happen when somebody abuses our no minimum tenure requirement. So far, we have not had anybody abuse it. There's a psychological safety piece that actually exists within it that we think is quite powerful. And a really fascinating one, which was definitely not expected, was that not everyone was on board with removing the distinction between maternity and paternity leave. We actually had two of our employees particularly stress at the time that they didn't believe it was actually fair that potentially a dad or someone who might have been adopting would get the same amount of leave as a mum who's potentially just given birth and has maybe a significant recovery journey ahead of them. We had to really split this out in terms of our framing of this to say that, ultimately there's a parental piece here, and there's obviously the more physical health piece that comes with, in some instances of childbirth, and really get back to the heart of no one's losing out of this. We believe that fundamentally, if you get to the core of what makes great parental leave, it's celebrating and supporting new parents in whatever the structure that exists. And we think 6 months can do a good job of both of those instances. I'm not sure if that quite scratched the itch that was creating that kind of questioning, but it was a really interesting challenge that came about where I think I jumped straight away to the conclusion that everyone would be on board with this. And it actually turns out that a few people fundamentally believed in that kind of gender identity or sex identity split that can exist between maternity and paternity leave entitlements. What's actually happened?
Pat, we have a question.
Yep.
Someone's asking, does this tie in at all with shared parental leave, or
Mhm.
is this completely separate?
Completely separate. So we've always taken the view, and obviously because we've got operations well across the globe, there's some different kind of shared parental leave versions that exist. But we've said at its heart, regardless of what exists in any country, every single person has 6 months fully paid parental leave. And anything that exists within various countries that potentially gives a different entitlement beyond that wouldn't otherwise be covered, that we'll simply add it on. So we tried to really treat it separately.
We have one more question from Danielle. Could Pat share the policy writing?
Yes, I
Sure.
will. I'm not
We'll
sure of the
follow.
best. I'm not sure of the best way to do that, but Emily,
Yeah,
I'm hoping you can help me with that. But
I'll
yes,
facilitate it. Don't worry.
happy to share it. So far, I think we've worked out there's 6 other companies that have just copy and pasted it. I'm not a believer in copy and paste. I believe in designing for your company, but happy to share it. Nothing secret about it. It's basically as simple as the previous slide, and then you can choose what you want to do with that. The final bit to this is the results of what's actually happened. Again, we're between 90 and 100 people, depending on the day at the moment with our hiring plans. But over the last 2 years, we've had 12 people that have taken parental leave since we introduced it. So, given we've been growing, somewhere between 10 and 15% of our workforce have accessed it. The split for that is we've had 10 dads and 2 mums. Um, Almost everyone, all but one person, actually chose to split up their leave and not take it in a 6 month block. The fascinating piece to this was one of the most critical elements that our parents said would be really, really meaningful, is their ability to be able to flex it as they need to. And there is a slight benefit of, obviously, as we talk about the next kind of metric behind it, is that actually half of the people who took parental leave shared with us the story that part of their reasoning for both the timing of it and the meaningfulness was actually to support their partner's return to work. And we often don't think about some of the indirect benefits of this, but we had a dad who was expecting his first child, and his partner, the mum of the child, was in a very, very senior role within another organization, and she had access to parental leave. It was a smaller amount of parental leave, and she took that parental leave, and the act of him being able to then take off 6 months, and he split it up into various different chunks based on their kind of family support arrangements too, actually supported his partner to be able to return at the conclusion of her parental leave back into the workplace, into her senior role, which is something that traditionally just gets slumped on women. That in the event that leave is not supportive enough or comprehensive enough, and somehow the stereotype of, well, the women must look after the family. In this case, it was a real interesting indirect benefit where we actually had half of our people all talk to us specifically around they chose to take their parental leave to support their partner returning back into the workplace. In terms of actual benefit, in terms of hiring, retention, it is our single most identified benefit over the last 2 years for why people want to join Fundapps. No one has yet to come back, or not come back, sorry, from parental leave. We've had no parents resign since we've introduced this, and no one's misused it. So we haven't had any instances where somebody has joined our organization, taken parental leave straight away, and then left at the end of it. Now, we have had instances of, actually, it was one of our first ones where somebody joined, they were open in the recruitment process around the fact that their partner, I think, was 18 or 19 weeks along, that they were expecting, I think, their second child, and oddly enough, didn't have any expectation for parental leave. We did end up granting it, so they were only a couple of months technically still in their probation when we put them on parental leave. They still work with us now, and the psychological piece, which I mentioned before, is the powerful bit here. When you're doing good by people in this regard, and you're giving people something that they're really not used to having and trusting that they use it, there's almost a psychological, not sure the word to describe this, but pull back into the organization. And one parent put it really, really nice, which was, the fact I had access to this kind of parental leave for me and my family, I want to keep working at Fundapps. Like, I want to give back to that. Which was a pretty kind of potent explanation that really helped reinforce why we're doing this. That is me talking at you for probably way too long about all things parental leave. So I'll stop there. But curious to know any questions, concerns, things that made you go, "Oh, that's interesting," or things that made you go, "Oh, I don't like that."
We have a couple more questions, actually. I think we have time for.
Mhm.
Lonnie is asking, have you looked to harmonize all your policies across all territories now? So has this been implemented across the board?
Correct. Um, when we put it in, we did think about whether we just give it a go first in the UK, given most of our people were in the UK.
Mm,
We decided that we would just go global all in one go. Pretty much every policy that we have, with the exception of some fun regional things around things like health insurance, we have a very different US health insurance arrangement than we do from the UK and the EU, obviously. But for every other policy that we have, we never create a regional difference. Everyone gets everything. Now, the side effect to that is the impact it has, therefore differs. It's got an incredible stickiness appeal factor for our US hiring in particular, just because it
I'm
feels so
sure.
foreign to have that kind of impact. It's a little bit less within some parts of Europe, where
Mhm.
people may be more used to having 4, 5, 6, sometimes 12 months of paid parental leave.
Mm. And one more question from Joe. Are there a maximum number of chunks you can take over the 2 years or a minimum length of time per chunk?
Only if the legislation mandates we have to. So I know in the UK, and I can't even remember the exact number, but I think if I'm just going to pick one here, I think for maternity leave, you've got to take at least 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever that
Mm.
number is at the point of the child's birth. So we always follow that because we can't, we can't break the law through this. Other than that, we haven't mandated anything. Now, if you go maximum opposite ends of spectrum in terms of how people have used it, we've had, other than one person who took 6 months in one go, we've had somebody who's done 3 and 3. And it was 3 months of the child's birth, and then their partner had actually a longer period of parental leave. They took that, and then when they went back to work, they then took off the 3 months to be able to support before they needed childcare. The opposite end of that spectrum is we've even had one person who has used their parental leave to actually help support them back into the workplace using a flexible work arrangement. So coming back in and using part of their parental leave to basically put them part-time but at full-time pay. We also said we're cool with that. I mean, ultimately the test here is the leave genuinely supporting your family and your circumstances to be able to be parents and structure it the way that you need to? And if the answer is
Mm.
yes, we're cool with that.
And then one more question. I was going to cut it off, but it's from your co-presenter, Rochelle. So sending it your way. Has there been many employees join and then shortly after joining take up this benefit? And if so, how did you manage from a resourcing perspective?
Great question, Rochelle. And it's probably that first challenge around administering that 2-year flexibility. It also applies in the instance that we hired, in this case, a developer who a couple of months in then went on parental leave. We believe that there are a few different ways you can address that resourcing gap, and depending on the team and depending on the role, there were different ways we could deal with it. In our bigger teams, particularly our developer team, who were organizing their product teams by kind of 6-week sprints, we actually realized we could safely take them out of our resourcing plans, and we wouldn't need to necessarily backfill. I mean, we're always hiring for developers anyway, but we didn't specifically say we're going to line up a fixed term contract to, or an agency to be able to support that. We did, however, in a different team, it was a 2-person team, and the more senior person in that team decided to take 6 months off and then supplement it with a whole period of unpaid leave. In that instance, it would be really, really poor, I think, of us to simply say we're not going to backfill, in which case we took out a fixed term contract for that person to be able to supplement that period. Now that fixed term contract has then also now gone on parental leave, which creates that kind of the double resourcing effect. However, because it's a shorter period of time, we've said, actually, you know what, there's 1 or 2 other people in the team in our sales team who can support some of these efforts. And we're also going to have an agency that was going to support some of the marketing work just to plug the gap.
Great.
Oh, there's one more from Joe, which is a
Joe,
great one. Can we cover that?
any one more clawback for people who leave shortly after the leave or don't come back from the leave?
Currently, no. Might we change it? Maybe. Where genuine answer, we have no idea how to treat this. We haven't had anyone yet who has potentially just left. The other thing is we don't want a clawback in particular to be the reason why somebody comes back to our workplace and not wanting to have to pay back that leave. I think if somebody doesn't want to come back, there's a more fundamental gap here in terms of we're not meeting either their career or personal needs, or they want to move on. So I'm really, really hesitant, but the questions come up recently around should we have something like that? So I
Mm.
can't answer your question. It's currently no, and I'd like to keep it that way, but I'm not sure if we will.
Thank you so much, Pat, for sharing your experience with us and taking everyone's questions. Now it's time to welcome our second speaker to the stage, Rochelle Ryan. Rochelle is the Director of People and Experience at VaynerMedia UK. And Rochelle is here today to share how Vayner has approached DE&I during a period of hypergrowth in their UK office, and how her team is scaling DE&I initiatives with the help of community resource groups. So Rochelle, I welcome you to the stage, and the floor is yours.
Hi.
Hey, Rochelle. Welcome. I'll
Thank
leave
you.
it to you.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I will, I guess, start with a bit of an introduction to me and my background. I have been working at VaynerMedia for just over 4 years now. Previously, my career was focused in tech, similar to a lot of you guys who've joined and Pat. However, with the shift to VaynerMedia, I moved into the world of advertising. I now lead the HR team, or as we call it here, Vayner People and Experience team for Vayner in the UK, and soon to be an expansion into EMEA in 2022. In London at the moment, we're currently about 125 employees. Globally, however, we're over 1,000. But my role covers all aspects of people and experience in the UK, from payroll to performance to DE&I, etc. A bit about Vayner as a company. We are an advertising agency that prides itself on having a unique culture and perspective on the advertising industry as a whole. And it was founded in the US over 12 years ago by Gary Vaynerchuk, which some of you may know because he's quite famous and infamous on social channels, along with his brother AJ. And so I guess why we're here is to chat about how we've been scaling our DE&I initiatives during a period of hyper growth over the last 12 to 15 months. So I'm just going to quickly share, if I can, my quick presentation. Hopefully it is there. And so to kick off, what I first wanted to chat about was just 12 to 15 months during this period of hyper growth, because between July 2020 and March of this year, we doubled our headcount. So we grew over that space of time from 60 employees. We went into lockdown last March at 58 employees. So we had a slow and steady growth trajectory over the past 4 to 5 years since we were founded in the UK. However, we managed to win a lot of new business with new clients during the pandemic last year, which then catapulted our growth. And so we doubled our headcount. We have always had a desire to do the best we can from a D&I perspective as a global company. However, this period of growth coincided, I guess, with the need and desire to focus more of our time and attention on DE&I following tragic events such as George Floyd, and just the growth of Black Lives Matter movement. And so locally here in the UK, our HR team was only 2 people, which was myself and a HR advisor. And although we had great ambitions and we had good foundations, we had to be realistic with what we could spend our time on when it came to DE&I over the past 12 to 15 months. And so we focused a lot of our time and attention on recruitment, and also utilizing our internal CRGs at Vayner, because we were very lucky to have well-established CRGs. So I will just chat quickly about how we used our values and culture to guide us. As I mentioned, we're very lucky to have good foundations in place, with a very solid existing culture and company values. Gary and AJ set up VaynerMedia, as I said, 12 years ago. And because of kind of, I guess, their relationship as brothers, we've always had a very familial culture. And that because we're that independent founder-led business, we believe that it's in our interest and our power to do things first, our best. And the same is true for the talent we seek to attract and retain, which is why, I guess, some of our values such as empathy, compassion, the idea of bringing your whole self to work are woven into the fabric of our company culture. And so last summer, we began by weaving these fundamental values into our recruitment process so we could ensure that we were hiring individuals who share these values and who can add to our culture. And then this in turn led to kind of a bit of an overhaul of our interview process. As an advertising agency, talent is kind of one of our most important assets. It guides our work and our culture. It lends itself to our clients' work. And so we really value diversity.
Rochelle, I think you accidentally muted yourself. It's the mic button right at the bottom. You're not back. under everyone's little icon pictures at the bottom, where it says cam on and mic on, you should see a red button where it's turned off. Yeah. Sliv, do you have any suggestions?
Maybe try to turn off your mic and your camera. Oh, now
Now you're fine.
Am I back?
Now you're fine.
Yes.
Great.
Oh,
Thank you.
sorry, I don't know what happened. It said it was on.
Don't worry.
Nothing like a little curveball mid sentence. Sorry about that. Let me know if it happens again. Hopefully it won't. Where was I? Anyway, yeah, so we tried to revamp our interview process so that we could weave in our values and mitigate any room for bias where possible. So yeah, we didn't reinvent the wheel by any means. However, up until then, I guess our interview process varied massively by department, could be lengthy in terms of how many people candidates would meet, has always been a bit informal. And so we knew, given our kind of upcoming growth and a number of open hires, how important putting some rigor on the process would be for DE&I. And yeah, so we streamlined our process across the agency. So it looked something like a phone screen with talent partners, or talent partner, a skills-based interview where the purpose of the interview was being to solely assess the candidate against the skills required to do the role, seeking just to establish how the candidate aligned to the job spec we had and the core competencies of the role. A second stage behavioral interview with a department head and an individual from another department, which at this point in the hiring process, we would have already been confident that a candidate has the required core skills to do the role. And the interview is more to explore whether the person demonstrates the right patterns of behavior and do they share our values and will they add to our culture. We also began to include more tasks in our interview process where possible, especially at entry level and more senior hire roles. To DE&I, because essentially the skills test forces hiring teams to critique the quality of a candidate's work solely, as opposed to unconsciously judging them based on appearance, gender, age, and personality, even in some instances. And yeah, we use these skills-based tests primarily at entry-level roles, and then for the more senior hires, we included task-based interviews where we would assess candidates' works by providing them a task to present at an interview. And so that was our main focus, revamping our recruitment process by using our values and culture to guide us last summer. And then internally, I guess we already had some smaller wins which we used to our benefit last summer in those two buckets. In terms of partnerships, we don't have an internal recruiter in London, which meant we needed an alternative to that. As a result, we've had a really long-standing partnership with a recruitment company called Hidden. We partnered with them over more traditional recruitment agencies because of their ethos and mission being to help their clients create modern, inclusive, and open hiring systems, which aligns very well with our culture and values. They also differentiate in that they provide unlimited hiring on a quarterly kind of subscription fee basis, meaning we didn't have to pay 15-20% on top of any hire's salary in recruitment fees. And we're also able to scale up and down as determined by our hiring needs. And obviously it's a given that we ramped up that partnership with them last summer. And as a result, we obtained a talent partner through Hidden to work with us internally as part of our people and experience team, who helped us to revamp that interview process. And a number of other partnerships that we had engaged with was in terms of enabling us to attract and hire diverse candidates, were POC and advertising, which are industry specific for us. POC is a creative network which exists to accelerate equality and equity for culturally and ethnically diverse people in the creative industries. And advertising is also focused on bringing the LGBTQ plus community in advertising and marketing together, and promoting that group within the advertising industry. Alongside Hidden, our partnership with Hidden, we things for the wider agency, so that we could, I guess, ensure that all interviews were knowledgeable on topics such as unconscious bias, positive action versus positive discrimination, do's and don'ts of interviewing, and all the many other things that are pertinent in interviewing at the moment. And so, as Emily mentioned, internally, we also focused a lot of our time on our CRGs, which we've been very lucky to have established over the last number of years. And I guess to Pat's previous point about inclusion, I couldn't agree more that inclusion is the key to any successful DE&I strategy. And so we utilize our community resource groups in this area specifically. I guess, what are CRGs at Vayner and how do they work is probably an important one to run through. So our working definition of CRGs is that they are inclusive spaces of community, conversation and support centered around a common identity and or allyship. They're typically a group of at least 5 individuals centered around one common identity, with inclusive membership across all of VaynerMedia and all of the VaynerMedia entities. One of the main challenges, I believe, from starting CRGs is, how do you start them? How do you ensure they're meaningful? How can they be set up safely? And so we have a framework for how we introduce and roll out CRGs at Vayner. We say that starting a new CRG is best done when there's kind of an unofficial community already started. It can be a Slack group, they can have previously held events for smaller kind of groups, informal. They've done group outings. And then the CRG then catalyzes the kind of grassroots community and momentum that has already been kind of achieved. The guidelines on the logistics to establish a CRG at Vayner, so that they can be set up safely and ensure that they're meaningful, are that there needs to be a minimum of 2 leads and then 3 committed members centered around that one common identity. They need the creation of an original logo. You can probably see some of our CRG logos on the slide there. They need to create a mission or a purpose statement for the group. There needs to be reoccurring monthly meetings on our public Vayner-wide culture calendar. There is a public Slack channel for anyone across the local offices or global VaynerX network. And then there is, and they're also required to put on 2 events per year in each city or office location. And the CRG leads are responsible for accurate budget tracking. And then I guess also our CRGs are office agnostic. We announce them in our orientation for all new hires across all offices, and the Slack channels are available to access by anybody as they're public. And so, yeah, we've leaned in on our CRGs very heavily to help with the inclusion piece and to promote, celebratory events, lead on resources for topics such as Black History Month, Pride, and whatnot. And so you can see here we've got a number of our logos here. So we've got the Vayner Latinx CRG, the feminist CRG, we've got an Asian CRG, a South Asian specific CRG, the Black CRG, LGBTQ plus CRG, and curly hair CRG. But yeah, I guess that's probably a broad overview of how we utilize the CRGs here in Vayner. I'm sure there's probably questions around CRGs because quite topical, and I know that a lot of companies are trying their best to set them up now in recent times, but we've just been lucky to have, I guess, quite established ones. So I'm going to stop speaking, and I'm sure there's questions.
We have a few on CRGs, and then we'll go back to the skills test. We had a question on that. So the first one is, what strategies have you used to keep momentum up with CRGs after they have been created?
It's a great question. So we, as a people and experience team, tend to lean in and be kind of there in the background as an advisor for the CRG leads. So we have a monthly CRG leads and people and experience team kind of meet up where everybody gets together just to discuss any challenges, which obviously there was kind of in lockdown when everybody had Zoom fatigue and there wasn't many turning up to, the monthly meetings for the CRGs and whatnot. And so just working with the leads on those. And in terms of kind of keeping momentum, I guess that having that foundation of needing to put on, like, say, 2 events or run 2 events, so it doesn't have to be an event, it can be like a celebration of some sort or a social, but having that kind of foundation of requiring the CRGs to run two events every year, I guess kind of almost forces the leads' hands to maintain the momentum.
Yeah. We have another question that says, what do you think makes an effective relationship between people ops and CRGs to work and achieve your DE&I goals? Any tips? It's kind of the same as the last question.
So that
Anything else you would add?
Great. And also probably ties back to my answer previously of having that monthly check-in between the people and experience team and the CRG leads, because you can chat about like where your strategies are, where your thought process is, what's kind of pertinent for the people and experience team at that given time, what's coming up in the CRGs, where they want to focus, and how we can kind of bridge those two and bring them together. Most recently, we've been very lucky to hire an amazing Chief Diversity Officer also, Vanessa Vining, who's joined us maybe two months ago, Global Chief Diversity Officer, who will almost become that bridge for us going forward, which will also help just bring some structure and clarity around how we interact and make that relationship even stronger to achieve our DE&I goals globally.
How do you balance utilizing CRGs and not relying on them
I can't
to fix
hear
the
you.
issues that affect them? You can't hear me? That's weird. I'm having the same issue. What about now? Can you hear me now?
I think it's my mic again, or there's something wrong with my laptop because I can't hear you now.
Can anyone else hear me? Or is it just Rochelle?
Working well. I can hear you.
Chat. We can hear you. Okay. Okay, so Rochelle, one last question. How do you balance utilizing CRGs and not relying on them to fix the issues that affect them as a community the most? It's a great question. Perhaps we lost Rochelle. Rochelle, do you want to come back for a few minutes? Oh, Rochelle's gone. All right, well, thankfully we have more time to network together back in the office. Here she is.
Sorry, this is so typical that the tech doesn't work when we want it to.
Of course. Did you hear my last question?
No, sorry, I didn't.
How do you balance utilizing CRGs and not relying too much on them to fix the issues that affect them as a community the most?
I guess that's probably one of the reasons why we hired our Chief Diversity Officer, Vanessa, so that she can build out her team and work closely with the people and experience team and the CRGs to find that balance. Obviously, everybody's in a privileged enough position to be able to make such a hire, or to have the kind of commercial backing to do that. What we did in the past was, before Vanessa joined, especially last summer when Black Lives Matter movement really kicked off, was finding the time as a leadership team in London specifically anyway, to spend with those that are affected in those communities, to hear what they're thinking, what their concerns are, just understand more about their perspective, because obviously we're all from different backgrounds, and you can't even begin to understand what certain people go through, and you just don't know, right? It's just really hard to know unless they tell you. So creating that open, safe space with the communities to hear them, but actually also I think it's one thing, you know, just doing it as a tick box exercise, but actually listening and then actioning things gains the trust of the communities with HR and leadership. And so that's kind of where we've been focusing our time and trying to build it up. And then in turn, that just makes for a better and more inclusive environment, because they know that they're being listened to as well.
Absolutely. I think we've covered all of the questions now. So thank you, Rochelle, for joining us and sharing your experience in the DE&I space and your CRG strategy at Vayner. And thank you, everyone who attended the session. I hope you learned something new today. Please keep your eyes peeled on your inbox this afternoon for a follow-up survey. Anyone who attended the session will be asked to vote on the topic for our next session. And spoiler alert for those of you who stuck around to the end, next quarter's event will be in person in London, pending any wild new developments with the pandemic, of course. And I'll also include Pat's policy in the follow-up email this afternoon, as well, as a couple of you requested that. For those of you who are interested, we will now pivot out of presentation mode, and you'll find yourself back in the virtual office space with different areas that you can choose to sit. So feel free to explore, pick a seat, spend some time chatting and networking with your fellow UK customers. Pat and Rochelle will be seated as well. So if you have more questions for them, or you didn't have time, we didn't have time to address one of your questions during the session, now is the time to pull up a virtual seat next to them and start a conversation. So I hope everyone has a great afternoon, and I will see you back in the office. Bye, everyone.